Another blood-red sunset and yet another moon face, and still another 100 miles to my next resting place. Driving down the road, eyes on the horizon. Within my car, I'm all alone, but feeling good and feeling strong, knowing that this path I'm on brings me to myself. I'm driving.
Hey now all, this is the Spirit Doctor, Kelle Sparta, and you are listening to Spirit Sherpa, the show that helps and encourages you on your journey to unlock your magic mojo. With me is Jeff Warren. He is the co-author of Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. And I don't know about you, but I'm a fidgety skeptic. And so he's a meditation instructor and a journalist. He's known for his dynamic and accessible style of teaching. I actually ran into him in the parking lot when I was at the Art of Living Retreat Center doing Soul Treat, and talked him into coming on to this show. He's the co-author of the New York Times bestselling Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics and author of The Head Trip, a travel guide for sleeping, dreaming, and waking, and the founder of the Consciousness Explorers Club, a nonprofit meditation adventure group based in Toronto, Canada. He is the co-host of the Consciousness Explorers podcast. Yes, you heard podcast, right? So you can find that at explorers.fm, which explores the mystery of being human through practice. His mission is to empower people to care for their mental health through the realistic, intelligent, and sometimes irreverent, yay, we love irreverent here, exploration of meditation and personal growth practices. His meditations reach millions of people through the 10% Happier and Calm apps. Welcome, Jeff. I'm excited to have you.
Well, Kelle, thank you for having me. I'm excited too.
So tell me, how did you get into teaching meditation? What brought you here?
Well, sort of, I guess, it was an indirect route. It was never something that was on my radar. I was a dysregulated journalist with deadlines, and I was working for the CBC. I was a radio journalist. I was very interested in kind of covering stuff around the brain. And I guess I was interested in mental health without really realizing that I was sort of the subject of what I was interested in, that I was having my problems myself. So I kind of got interested in journalistically, and I wrote a book about consciousness and how it works, kind of from the Venn diagram between the objective brain activity and subjective experience. Like, what could we learn in that space? And that was sort of through that, did a lot of research into meditation. I started doing it myself. And then I just realized, wow, this is really what I need. This is the medicine for me. And I just got very deep into practice and kind of went crazy with it. And eventually had a teacher who really just encouraged me to share what I was learning. And he thought I had a particular knack for it. And that was, 12 years ago now. And so I started to, and it's been pretty interesting adventure. I mean, I didn't want to at first because I thought, who am I to ever teach meditation? I have all these mental health challenges. I have an ADHD diagnosis. I have a bipolar diagnosis. Like, I felt like the avatar of mental unhealth, the anti-Buddha. And, but I guess it turns out that your capacity to be honest about where you are and the things I've learned the ways I've had to learn how to do meditation based on who I am actually turn out to be lessons and insights that are relevant to a lot of people. So it's been turned out to be a pretty good fit, I guess. The teaching part, I mean. Yeah.
Well, I will say that I ran into a lot of your students at that retreat and spoke with them at mealtimes, and they all spoke very highly of you. So clearly you are a good instructor, because they were very happy.
I tell lots of jokes.
You and me both, baby. One of the things that I thought was most interesting is that typically in our industry, the average attendee at different events is usually women. And, it's typically 76% women, and white women in particular. And your group was a diverse group of men. I don't think I saw a single woman.
Oh, it's usually about half and half.
Is it?
There were quite a few women.
Well, maybe I was just like, I was just
but a lot of
assuming
dudes,
those were at our event. So because we were both on the same space at the same time. So, but yeah, that's a huge differential. And what do you attribute that to?
Well, yeah, I think it's because of my science background, and just my approach to teaching practice is, it's very much about kind of trying to speak in a very grounded, accessible way about simple, like explaining the mind in terms of the simple kind of engineering like dynamics. Like there are certain simple practical rules around working with the mind that you can kind of learn. And it's like, I think laying it out like that makes it seem less airy-fairy, to use the term that I hear a lot from people saying, you don't do it like this, but just more kind of more engineering, more practical, and that just appeals to a kind of masculine temperament. And also I do know about the science, so I can say a little bit about sometimes where relevant about where certain findings are. And that, of course, in our culture, science is the great sort of authority. And that brings a lot of people in. Now, I have different thoughts on that, but I think that you got to use the language that is going to meet people where they are. And that's kind of what I'm interested in. Like, how do I reach the largest number of people? So, yeah.
Awesome. So talk to us a little bit about that. Talk to me about how does meditation and science, where do they overlap, and how do you talk about it from that angle?
I mean, my primary focus now is in trying to present subjective experience in a rigorous way, like akin to a kind of scientific way. So when I started out, I would refer to specific kind of findings within science, say about the default mode network, or about like the way it increases regulation, seems to increase emotional regulation, and people were comforted by that. But as I got deeper into it, I realized that, how do I explain this? Well, you'll get it. We don't live in the brain. We live in experience. We live inside our feelings, our thoughts, our sensations. Like that's the domain in which we live. And so although the science can be a helpful way to begin to give people a certain amount of confidence that there is, a third person perspective on this that seems to be supported by researchers, really what they want to know is how to work in real time with their experience right now. And there are certain kinds of operating principles and certain skills that cultivate through practice that you can talk about in a quite rigorous way. And then it's like people start to get their hands on the levers. You know what I mean? Like they can actually, or put their hands on the dials. They feel like they can actually palpably begin to watch in real time how mind's playing out. And so so that ends up being really the focus for me. So I teach about how concentration works. I teach how equanimity works. I teach how the clarity piece works, the compassion piece. I talk about how to find it in the moment, what it looks like, and what is realistic in terms of how to maintain those things outside of a practice. And so I think the structure of that framework feels reassuring for people. And that's kind of how I go about it.
So I listen to the morphic field of my listeners as people are talking. And what happened was when you said clarity, they went, woo, how does clarity work? Okay. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, it is a really interesting one. Clarity and equanimity are just like magic.
Well, then talk about them both. Let's talk about them both. Sure.
I'll talk about them both. I mean, they're related. Okay. Where to even begin? So clarity gets cultivated in all kinds of different practices. It could be sensory clarity, where you're just getting more curious about zooming into your external senses and smelling things, seeing things more crisply and hearing things more crisply and detecting more nuances in smell. I mean, so there's that part of clarity. There's getting clear about the internal world. So both are how we experience thoughts, the auditory quality of thoughts, like whose thoughts are they in terms of the auditory? Is it our voice or someone else's voice? I know that there's a lot that goes on in the inner world, like our emotions. Where do we experience emotions? Can we get more literate about the specifics of it? Can we zoom in on some of these more spiritual phenomena that might be happening in experience, like learning to trust your inner voice? Like it doesn't hit you over the head the way your loud cognition does. It's a quieter space that comes sort of through the heart. And so tuning into those things. So clarity is like boosting the resolution on these subtle signals. Clarity is also getting clear about what practices in my life are supporting me. When I get humble and I let myself just be here, what's coming? What are the lessons that are coming forward? And can I be clear enough to notice them? So now from clarity, you're moving into equanimity, which is this thing about getting out of your own way, this thing about being humble and genuinely inexperienced, not trying to push and pull on it, but letting the natural flow of reality present itself to you and being part of that natural flow of reality. So both those skills, the boosting the resolution and the kind of surrender to the flow of reality, they're literally things you could find. I could show you how to find them in this moment. You're probably already doing it a bit. As soon as I start talking about the surrender piece, that's going to start to like kind of, people will start to notice, oh yeah, I can do that a little bit, or they'll be doing it on their own anyway. Or like you can start to find it, and there's a kind of internal letting go that allows you to kind of, allows the world to update itself through you, I guess you could say. So those are, and then the more the equanimity happens, the more you get out of your own way, the more the world will surprise you with what it's going to bring forward, as everyone I'm sure on your podcast knows. And that's wonderful, and I think also that part of the equanimity is the equanimity with not knowing, the don't know mind, the not needing to have front load your understanding of reality with all these models. I mean, they can be helpful as views to point us in different directions, but to also know how to let go of these things and just stay in this humble space of not knowing. That is a very powerful, receptive place to be. And so, in different times, in different ways, I'll point to those skills, and they, like, the applications are almost unlimited, and it's just so, I think, so interesting.
Well, so, I'm going to out my listeners for a minute here. They're all control freaks. I know, because I'm a recovering control freak myself. And so, we all resonate together. So the letting go piece is not always the easiest. Okay.
No, it's the hardest.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that for them? Because I know they're going, oh yeah, letting go. Like, that's so easy.
Yeah. Well, first of all, compassion, because it is very hard. We don't even know the ways we're fixated, all the ways we're trying to micromanage and control our reality from moment to moment. We do this because we've had experiences of not being safe in the world, or not being, not trusting that it's okay just to be. So we've had to learn to develop these compensatory sort of habits. And so the first thing to say is, when we're talking about letting go, we're not saying abandoning all those strategies. It has much more to do with holding them lightly. It has to do with, because if you're only ever holding on for dear life, it's like a clenched fist. After a while, you don't know how to unclench the fist. You don't even realize you have a clenched fist. But that clenched fist is preventing you from your open hand from receiving all kinds of support or all kinds of things that can come in. So this is why it's so valuable. How do you do it? And that's what a practice is. Meditation is literally the practice of this. It's sitting, and at first, the way you practice doing it, and everyone can try doing it with me right now, is you just sort of make a kind of a intention inside the meditation of letting everything be here. So letting the sounds be here around you, even if there's neighbors loud next door, or things you might ideally wish weren't there, or maybe my voice, you wish it was a little more quiet, but it is what it is. Reality is presenting what it's presenting. So can you just kind of loosen inside and stop bracing against sounds you don't like, and in the same spirit, stop bracing against thoughts you don't like or feelings? Can you just kind of soften through the whole front of the body and just be like this open porous place to let everything sort of express itself through you? And you start to learn through practice what that little adjustment feels like. That, oh, this is subtle, but I can kind of see what he's saying. I do this. Here's a vivid example. Imagine you're in the shower, and it's no problem when there's the warm water. It's all warm, your pores are open, you're relaxed, but the hot water is about to run out. as the cold water arrives, most of us tighten up as a way to protect ourselves against the cold. But you can do the opposite. You can breathe out and soften through the whole body and just absorb the cold. Let it be there without resistance. And actually, you can stay much longer in the cold when you do that. That's what all those cold plunge techniques will show you. They're all around cultivating a kind of open equanimity with it. So whatever you did just there in your imaginations or in your body to kind of open to the sensation of cold, or to open to the message of what I'm saying, the sensory experience of this sound wave, that's equanimity. And you just do it again and again and again through practice. And as the clarity builds too, you start to notice all these tightened layers of control, and they start to let go one by one. It's like sometimes you're able to kind of almost do it, even though it's not really a doing, it's kind of an undoing. Other times it just happens spontaneously. And the more it happens, the more in Buddhism, they say the prajna, the wisdom function, the more you're able to kind of channel what wants to come through. Now there's also, you don't want to complete, there's a dialectic here between the value of also still being present, deciding when is enough. You know, that frontal lobe or that editor function is still useful. So it's not like surrender, let go all the time. Sometimes there's a place for bearing down, for putting up a boundary, for, but practice is the cultivation, you could say, of becoming your own authority in all this, your own teacher, knowing what you need at different times and what will serve you. So I don't even know what I said there, but hopefully it was, it applied to what you asked me, because you never know. Because I just let go too. I just go, I let go and go, okay, well, what wants to come through? And then there's often a self-organizing kind of, observation of some kind that just sort of lands.
Yeah. So, it's the equivalent of saying that you're channeling.
Yeah,
so,
definitely. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. A friend of mine was recently on a podcast with me, and she was listening to it before she caught on with me, and she texted me and said, well, shit, you're just channeling all of this all the time, aren't you? I'm like, oh, yeah. And she's just like, people think I know all this stuff. But no, I'm just, tapping in, and I'm connected. And, some of the stuff I knew, and some of it I'm just like going, oh yeah, it's like this,
Totally. It's creativity.
And, yeah.
That's what creativity is too.
Yeah. It's a connection into the higher self, into your spirit guides, into the all that is. And, where we get the information is where we tap in. Right. So it's like, if you ask a question, the quality of the question you ask will determine the quality of the answer that you get. Right. And that's one of those things that I talk to my students about all the time. I'm like, okay, if you're going to ask a question, ask a good one. Right. Don't just say yes or no questions, because that gives you very little information. Always ask a who, what, where, when, why. Right. And preferably, a why or a what question, because who and when are pretty much short answers. I want long answers.
Yeah,
right?
Interesting. So it's interesting to me that I looked at your podcast thing, little description, and spirits and entities and ancestors and all these rich kind of persona and characters in the internal world and maybe in the external world too. And I find that really fascinating. Like through my meditation teaching, I would say that I get a big slice of regular humanity. And that's I like that. I like kind of working at the wide end of the funnel, the regular folks. And of those folks, I would say maybe 15% would have those kinds of experiences that you're talking about, which is really interesting. And they're of course really rich, so interesting, those experiences. But they're not something most people have, or rather, maybe more accurate of putting it is, they may be having them, but they're not aware they're having them, whereas the 15% are either they're happening in a dramatic way, or they've learned to tune into these sort of subtle registers. So So it's something I've had to learn to do as a meditation teacher is, I think often at the beginning of if you're trying to teach meditation to anybody, regular person off the street, they often have this idea that it's about that all the strange phenomena that can happen. And that's one of the reasons that they're intimidated by it, or they don't feel they can relate to it. So I've had to learn to kind of teach it without, in this much more general way and then if I do talk about that stuff, I just say, hey, this material can also happen, and here are ways to work with it. And there's actually, it's a whole path in and of itself. And so I guess I'm kind of curious how you think about this phenomena that you discuss on your podcast about how widely accessible it is, and what it, and if it is there, when you do have these things, what's the best way to approach working? I mean, there's so much we could ask about it, but anything that comes up from that.
Well, so it's a great question. I personally believe that almost anyone can develop psychic skills. And the biggest challenge is that a lot of people are scared of them. And I know this because when I was dating, and I was dating for 16 years, I would tell people I was a psychic, which I never did in the first date because they always said, "Oh, read me," which of course bad. If you're a psychic out there listening and your date asks you on a first date to read them, don't do it. It exposes them too much. You'll never get a second date. And so, but this is the thing, is that people would either be like, "Ooh, read me," or they'd be like, "Oh." Right. And they were afraid. And inherently, everybody's afraid that you're going to tell them they're going to die. That's always the fear. And if they're afraid of thinking somebody else who's psychic is going to tell them that they're going to die, they're afraid that if they tap into their psychic abilities, they're going to see that they're going to die, or that somebody they love is going to die. That's the inherent imprint that everybody's terrified of. And so that gets in a lot of people's ways. And then they're also afraid of the ghosts. It's like, I keep trying to explain to people that the astral world is no different than the physical world, in the fact that there are good people and not so great people. And there are helpful people and people who don't really want to help you. And all just like when you walk into a new city, you have to figure out what the good parts of town are and the not so great parts of town are, so that you know where you can go to be relatively safe to do the work that you want to do in that space, right? And that, that is the nature of this reality. And, we're living in duality. We have a balance of what we would call good and bad, or good and evil, or whatever it is that you want to call it, right? Within this context, we have a wide variety of experience. And that's true whether you're in the physical world or whether you're in the energetic world. And so, I think the problem is that people don't have a perspective on what the astral world is. They don't know how to identify if something is messing with them, or how to protect themselves if they do. And so they get scared and they just shut it down. They're like, nope, I'm out. And so I think it's about normalizing the experience for people. It's about explaining to them what I just said. It's like, you don't walk into a biker bar, and start shooting your mouth off. You just don't do it, right? You don't walk up to scary looking people and mess with them. It's a bad idea, right? But you can walk in, and on the other end of things, you don't walk into a really nice restaurant and start screaming at the top of your lungs, right? It's the appropriate behavior for the appropriate environment, right? And so that's what we're talking about on the astral at the same time. It's like, if you're going to go into a personal power, which on the astral would be, if you're going to talk to a deity or a demigod, or, an elemental, or somebody who's powerful, you go in with the appropriate amount of deference, right? An appropriate amount of respect. It's the same thing here, it's not different, but people, because they're not familiar with the environment, they think it is. Now, there are some things that are vastly different. Okay. What you think matters. The thoughts in your head matter on the astral, because those are what you're communicating with. And so they can leak out even if you don't mean them to. The way that you phrase things matters. The way that you set your intentions matters. What you think about yourself matters, because that determines how well you can protect yourself or not on the astral. So there's a lot of pieces in there that do matter, that don't matter as much here, or aren't as evident. I should say they do matter in the physical, they just aren't as evident. So
yeah, see, that's a bit overwhelming to me. I had, when I used to do a lot of ayahuasca, I started to get the things got very porous, like during the ceremonies, of course, you're interacting with entities and spirits, and it's like really a lot going on. It can be quite overwhelming. But then afterwards, and for a few years, like as I was falling asleep, I kept hearing voices talk to me, and it was like it was a lot. And I just, at that point, I'm just trying to figure out how to manage the external world, the regular world of humans I can touch and all those things. And I found it was, for me, it was, I just basically closed up in that way, because I just didn't want to develop any more of those sensitivities, because I had to figure out what was going on over here first. Not that I think some people don't have an option to, but it just seems like a whole other level of stuff to have to get used to. And so I was like, if I didn't have to do it, I wasn't going to, but it doesn't mean I wasn't interested.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And this is one of the reasons why I tell people not to do ayahuasca until they have done the first 2 stages of healing, which is to find their emotional safety first, and then to solidify their sense of self, right? To be able to set their boundaries and, claim their space and own their power and, know who they are in a solid way. And that solidifies their energetic container. And so when you do those 2 pieces, then you're ready to do the shadow work. And that's what ayahuasca is good for, is for helping with the shadow work, if that's the path you want to take. But if you skip over those first 2 steps, then you end up in a space like you were in, where you're just overwhelmed, and the spaces that are opened for you are too much, right? And that's what happens. Yeah.
I totally concur with that. I guess the thing is, how do you know that you've successfully done those first 2? How do you know that you've individuated enough and got a solid enough sense of self? Like, you might have the subjective experience that you do, but it's never going to be perfect, So, there's doing your due diligence, and then there's also just a certain amount of just grace involved.
Yeah. Well, I recently wrote a book about that. So there you go. It's a good indicator, but you're right. There's no hard and fast rule. And in fact, I talk to my students. I was talking to my advanced students earlier today, actually, and actually 2 different of my advanced students I sent back to materials that they had worked with a year or 2 earlier, and said, go back and reference this again, go back and reference that again, go back and look at this, because, these are coming back around. So, we have this concept in the Western world that, things are like goals. It's like it's one and done, right? And so, you get this done, you get that done, you get that done, boom, done. You can put it away. In the spiritual world, it doesn't work like that. In the spiritual world, it's a spiral, and you come back to these issues over and over and over again, and these practices over and over and over again, because that's what we do. And so it's an unrealistic, it's unrealistic to expect that you get to be done, right?
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, meditation is exactly the same. Meditation is life practice. It's the same insight again and again and again and again. You're having it ever deeper levels. Exactly like you said, it's a spiral. It's the insight is, it's the same thing of getting over yourself, realizing that your ego is running the show, backing up, letting that kind of unhook, resting in a wider, more spacious kind of non-identity, and then it takes over again, and then there's an unhooking again. It just happens deeper and deeper, and you get more and more subtle about all the different ways in which you're actually not really being present, and you're actually subtly, deluded, or you're biased or confused about things, and but it just goes on forever. There's no getting to the end of that, and then there's no getting to the end of the learning how to live from this more authentic place. It's just going to keep going. Maybe it's up for somebody, some super guru on a mountain. They got to a point, but I just don't believe it, because mind body is constantly, environment's always changing. It's constantly changing, developing. Like, to be in life is to be part of this process of continuous change and adaptation. And so That's just how it goes.
Well, one of my favorite authors, Richard Bach, who wrote Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's my favorite book. And it's a book within a book. And the Messiah's Handbook inside of this book says, if you want a quick test to know if your work here on the planet is done, here's the test. If you're still here, you're not done.
That's really good.
I'm like, yes, thank you very much.
Love that.
So,
That's brilliant.
The sooner we let go, I tell my students all the time, the sooner you let go of the goal, the better off you're going to be in spiritual practice, because
that's the equanimity. It's just what I was trying to point to earlier.
Like, just be present, be present in what's here and let it be, But I loved it when you said, hold it lightly, because I use that phrase all the time. I'm like, just hold it lightly. You can have it. You can be aware of it, but just don't attach to it. Just have it in your hand with your hand open, because, that's kind of where it is. So I knew when it was so funny because we were on that land together, and I saw all your people going up into your presentation, and I was like, I asked them about you and, what was going on, because I felt the resonance, and I was just like, I need to meet him. And I just set that intention. And then one day I'm like walking up to my car, and there you are. And I'm like, that's him. I know it's him. And I walked up and said hi, and you were like, hey. And I'm like, we started talking. I was like, yep, I knew it was you.
That's awesome, man. That's so cool to be plugged into those intuitions in that way, and to feel like you have a guide that you can trust, that you consult, and it's wonderful. I guess I kind of have that in terms of my internal radar around things, but I kind of see it as like reality is my guide or something. But to have it populated with different characters and energies, and it just creates a very rich inner world. And it's interesting to hear you talk about it.
Yeah. Well, and my guides are like, yeah, your quote unquote reality that you're tapped into is your guides. So.
Yeah. I figured. I do that at the beginning of my meditation practice. I ask for the presence and action of my holy guardian angels. Someone told me that ages ago, and I don't necessarily tell this to my like sober secular meditation, like science meditation students, but inside I'm just saying, hey, it's sort of like being humble and asking for support wherever it comes. And I have no doubt that reality is just richly, elaborated into these. And I, of course, how could it not be like that? So I just, I do feel a lot of gratitude for whoever is out there looking out for me.
Well, and so I'll give you a little bit of a gift here in the process, which is your guardian angel is one of many guides. And so your guardian angel is mostly there just to make sure you don't step off of a, curb in front of a bus. But, there are many other guides that are there to serve other purposes, and they come and go over the course of your life sometimes, and sometimes they're there for your whole life. Some show up for a day or an hour. Others show up for a lifetime, and, anywhere in between. And, when you tap into them, and angels in particular, you have to ask for advice. You have to ask for their help on an ongoing basis in order to get it. Although guardian angels are sort of the exception, they're always there to be guardians. But other angels must be asked regularly. Like you can't just
by name or something, or can you just say, hey, I could really use some help right about now, which I do.
Yeah, which you can do. You don't have to name them, but you can say, angels, can you do this for me? But you can't task them for like a month. You can't say, for a month. You have to say, hey, can you help me right now? Can you help me today? Can you be with me for this short period of time? You can't give them an ongoing task unless you're asking on the regular. So, they're sort of short attention span the beings, right?
ADD angels.
Yeah. See, so maybe you're part angel.
I've had someone tell me that before.
ADHD just means that you're part angel, right?
That'd be pretty sweet. There is something angelic about a lot of ADHD folks that I meet. And, the refreshment, they're just like boing, 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 back to the, because they just can't stay concentrated. So they're always getting refreshed by the present. Yeah. So can you, are you able to, like, when you're talking to people, do you tune into, can you find out like how many angels and guides they have around them at a particular moment? Is that something that, or is that only, we can only do that for ourselves?
No,
or?
you can absolutely do that for other people. I mean, you've got a whole host of people, the minute you said that, there were like 20, 30 people who showed up behind you. And they say that there's a lot more that show up when you do your big events. So they're there to support the room. And so they help with the space. So yeah, there's like this whole army of them. Army's a bad word. It's not the right word for it, but there's a contingent that shows up, right? A council.
Contingent of celestial,
some celestials,
huggers,
some
movers, shakers.
Some celestials, some guides, some, other beings, all sorts of different beings show up. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel myself to be in good company.
Yeah, there you go. So, well, this has been really fascinating. I'm going to ask you. So, usually at the end of the episodes, when I had my co-host who is resigned after 3.5 years, and I'm now interviewing new co-hosts. But one of the things he and I would do was ask for a Kellyism at the end of the episode that just sort of was a thought for the day. And I'm going to ask you to do that today. I'm going to ask you to just sort of tap in and tell our listeners whatever comes through for you that you feel like they need to hear.
Well, my favorite, what's coming through for me is the community is the teacher. That's kind of a huge principle in my life and in my teaching. And it's not creating a hierarchy out of, the idea of teacher, but being open to seeing how it's happening all around us. And there's all these different parts of the world are here to support us, and we're here to support them. And also means learning from other people's insights and having a kind of community space where you can listen to someone talk about a mental health challenge, and the way they're articulating it makes you realize you have that same challenge, and the way they met it ends up becoming a solution for you. And so distributing the learning through one big nervous system, that would be my takeaway. I think there's nothing more important in life.
That's very cool, because that actually layers upon layers upon layers, right? Because that works in community. It works with the earth. It works with atoms. It works all the way up and down, right? Which is fantastic. So thank you for that. I'm enjoying that energy. So if our listeners want to learn how to meditate with you, how would they do that?
Well, I do a free thing every Sunday night called the Do Nothing Project, where I just sit in community with a whole bunch of people from all around the world. And I just guide a very simple sort of 20-minute practice, 25-minute practice. It's not like a place of like dropping wisdom or trying to be special. The whole point is it's just very simple, ordinary practice of being in community with other people. And that's called the Do Nothing Project. And that's on YouTube. I have a website, jeffhorn.org, where you can find out some of those different things. I'm on the Calm app and 10% Happier app. My podcast, the Consciousness Explorers podcast, which I do with my friend Tasha, that is all about exploring fun practices from different modalities and doing them together, like actually doing a practice and then unpacking it. What's happening? What are we learning here about being human? And so that would be another way, I think. And then I have my nonprofit, the Consciousness Explorers Club. They do basically free things every Monday night, or you can support through Patreon, and all different teachers, different kinds of practices. And there's a community activation kit there around how to start your own community practice group if you're interested. So those are some things.
That's a lot of really cool stuff. So in case you missed it, we will put them in the show notes. So don't panic if it went by too fast. We'll get those in the show notes for you. And thank you so much for coming. It was so great to make this transition from random meeting from my intention to our intentional meeting on my part to
totally. Yeah, so great to meet you, Kelly. I'm so glad that all happened and we got to hang out here. And nice to meet all of your listeners. And I just wish everybody well.
This has been awesome. Thank you for being here, Jeff. So that's all we have for this week. Tune in next time when I share another episode on energy, magic, and the spirit world. I'm Kelle Sparta here with Jeff Warren, and you have been listening to Spirit Sherpa. So long, everyone.
Driving down the road, eyes on the horizon. Within my car, I'm all and strong, knowing that this path I'm on brings me to myself. I'm driving, wandering.